The coffee burned my tongue before the day had a name. Steam rose in a pale ribbon from the tin cup, fogging the small square of glass by my bunk and turning the palm fronds outside into watercolour. Somewhere down the corridor a tap dripped in a stubborn rhythm, slow as a metronome. Plink plink, meant for a morning that was supposed to be easy. Sunday. Liberty for some, laundry for others, church for a few. The barracks air smelled of starch and soap and a thread of machine oil that never quite left our clothes. I remember the linen against my forearms, rough from too many washings, and how I breathed in, expecting calm, and got that hint of iron on the air instead, as if the day itself had nicked a finger. I dressed by habit, undershirt, trousers, belt, the white jumper pressed last night, until the creases lay sharp and obedient. The brass on my belt buckle caught a sliver of early light and tossed it one bright wink, then gone. Out the window, Ford Island lay quiet in its green, the harbour a sheet of pewter, the blue shoulders of the Koalau Range stacked against the sky. You could forget in those first minutes that this was a place for warships. The grey of them rested like sleeping animals. Even Nevada, my ship, seemed gentle from here, moored and patient, a thing with its breath held. From the next bunk, Caffrey snored the last of his dreams into the pillow. He had a ukulele he insisted he'd learn to play, though he only knew 2 chords and a third that sounded like a drawer of spoons dropped down a stairwell. He'd played late the night before, after lights out, a soft clumsy tumble of sound that crept under the blankets and sat beside me like a dog. He was from Ohio. He'd told me twice, when we ran out of new things to say, that the winter there bit right through a man's socks. I told him Hawaii had no business being this soft. A person could forget the weight of anything here. On the little shelf above my bunk, a letter from my sister lay folded once, then again, as if it were something that needed to be contained. I touched the edge without opening it. She'd written about our mother's apple pie and how the neighbour's boy left for the army with his cap crooked, and never noticed. Everything back home felt smaller in letters, like the words had to be packed tight so they'd fit through the mail slot. The first sound that wasn't ours came in thin, like a string plucked far away, a single engine, high and neat, and I thought of the morning training flights we sometimes watched, how they would skate over the harbour and away toward the North Shore, growing small and harmless. I leaned close to the window and breathed onto the pane and wiped a clear circle with the heel of my hand. The sky was a knitted blue, gulls drifted like loose stitches. Time is it? Caffrey mumbled, turning over, the blanket catching on his heel. Too early, I said, though it wasn't. Colours would be soon enough. 8 o'clock had a way of arriving whether or not we were ready for it. I took another sip of coffee and felt it settle me from the inside, the way a calm hand on the shoulder does for a spooked horse. In the hall, boot steps slapped and faded. Someone laughed and then choked it back as if they'd broken the spell. I thought about the way the ships wore their names like saints. Arizona, West Virginia, Oklahoma, California, lined along Battleship Row as if a child had placed them there with deliberate hands. Each morning the sun would shoulder over the range and the paint would wake into colour, the water starting to move with that easy tide. Every routine had its shape. Decks swabbed, brass shined, coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in, the jokes older than any of us felt. If you kept to the groove of it, the hours slid by. I tucked my letter away and slid the locker door shut with a flat metal click. The sound echoed a little, as if the corridor had grown longer when I wasn't looking. I told myself not to be dramatic. The air simply carried things differently at dawn. I pinned my collar, ran a thumb over the stitching out of habit, then grabbed my Dixie cup hat and set it just so. The face looking back from the bit of mirror was someone I had been working toward, jaw a little less soft, eyes not quite so startled. I liked the way the uniform made me belong to something larger, the way a wave belongs to an ocean without forgetting its own shape. On the way to the mess, I passed the open door of the washroom and caught the bright bite of soap and the damp cast of tile. A petty officer was wiping his jaw with a towel, the morning already tucked under his belt. "You on Nevada today?" he asked, as if I might be anywhere else. Aye, I said. "Don't be late for colours," he said, though there was a smirk tucked behind it. Nobody was late on a quiet Sunday. In the mess, the eggs were powdered and the bacon thin as paper. But the coffee was generous, and men leaned over their plates like farmers at dawn, grateful for the work of eating. Voices were low, the way they are when the day hasn't made its demands yet. Someone at the far table was telling a story about a dance in town the night before, the one with the paper lanterns and the band that didn't know when to stop. The island had a way of giving back to us what the Navy took. Music, fruit sweet as July, women with hibiscus in their hair, and laughter that made you stand a little taller even if it wasn't meant just for you. The engine sound returned. Not one now, but several, their droning stitched together into a tone that wasn't quite right. A few heads tilted in the same small motion, as if pulled by a thread. It could be training. It usually was, but the note of it had moved lower, almost into the chest, the way thunder becomes a feeling. "Busy morning," Caffrey said around a mouthful, then grinned to make it nothing. "Maybe," I said, and put my cup down. Out past the screen door, the harbour carried the light like a promise. The ship set into it as neat as a diagram. I stood on the small stoop and let the air find me. It tasted of salt and something faintly metallic, like a penny on the tongue. Across the water, a gull threw its cry and then fell silent midway, as if it had flown into a wall you couldn't see. The palms aligned themselves and held still. For a breath, the island seemed to wait with me, a listener with its head cocked. Men drifting toward their posts, slowed without deciding to, one hand on a cap brim, the other shading the eyes. I followed their gaze and found the same nothing blue, some high feathers of cloud, the regular promise of day. The engines spoke again, closer now, and I saw it, a glint like a fish turning just under the surface, catching sun and giving it back. Then another, and a third, not where I expected them, not where the training flights traced their easy lines. We didn't have words at first. We had shape and speed and the particular hum of a thing, intent on itself. The planes were lower than they ought to be at that spot in the sky, threading the morning like needles. I felt my mouth go dry in a way that had nothing to do with coffee. A yeoman beside me let a cigarette go unanswered between his fingers until ash fell in a long quiet ribbon onto the stoop. "Odd," he said, which was the safest shape of the thought. Something in my body, a small old animal, stood up and looked toward the water. Nevada sat steady, oblivious. The flag furled to its own breath, waiting for 8 o'clock to tell it what to do. I imagined a deck beneath my shoes, the familiar give of it, and wanted to be there suddenly, not for duty but as if the ship were a place of understanding an hour had reached for and found. A bell far off, maybe a truck backing, maybe a bicycle, rang twice, and stopped. The engine's note sank again, turned coarse at the edges, the way a voice does when it's about to shout. Across the harbour, a line of gulls lifted all at once from the pier, a torn white seam tugged by an unseen hand. I thought of Caffrey's 2.5 chords, and the way they never quite resolved, how your ear waited for the note that would tell the others where to sit. "Colours in 20, someone said behind me, trying to start the world on time. The first plane broke from the neat figure the others were making and slid across the sun like a hand over a candle. For a heartbeat, it was only a dark shape, moth small, nothing to worry a man's mind. Then it dropped a fraction lower, and even from here I could see the pilot's canopy catch a gold smudge of light. The engine wore its urgency naked. It wasn't the way our boys came in when they were playing at war. This was something else, closer to the ground, closer to us. I adjusted my cap without meaning to. The brim had gone too light, as if there weren't enough shade in it for what my eyes were trying to take. The men beside me leaned forward in the same small way, and without a word we all began to walk, first toward the quay, then faster as if proximity were an answer. The plane's skin flashed again, and a thought I didn't want arrived, not as a phrase but as a chill behind the ribs, a bead of sweat at the base of the spine. The morning, which had belonged to starch and coffee and easy laughter, tightened, a string drawn a notch too far. Somewhere still, far, still small, a sound like a door slammed against wind rode the water and came to meet us. And then I saw, clear as a drop on glass, the red circle on a wing banking into the sun. The red circle burned in my sight long after the plane levelled out. A sun inside the morning sun. No one said the word. We didn't need to. It pressed itself into our chests, lodged in the pulse, and made each of us a little more alert. a little less certain of where to put our hands. The engines weren't one sound anymore. They layered over each other like currents colliding, rough where they met. Another shape crossed above the palm line, smaller, faster, then another behind it. They came in loose ribbons, not the neat blocks of formation we'd learnt to trust. On the pier, Ensign Mallory stood with his cap pushed back on his head, squinting up, his lips working silently through a thought. He was younger than he looked from a distance, and I remember thinking how the gold of his bars caught the light like decoration, not command. Then the sound changed again, sharper now, as if it had teeth. A gull cut low over the quay, then wheeled wildly as if shoved. The air itself felt different, heavier, like a room where a storm is being kept in the next chamber over. From somewhere across the water came a thump, small, almost polite, the kind of noise you'd expect from a dropped crate. We all paused, heads tilted, as if we could draw the sound closer to inspect it. Then came another, louder, and the surface of the harbour rippled in widening circles. Men began to drift faster toward their ships. Conversation shortened to gestures. Someone shouted for a signalman, his voice breaking the quiet like a plate dropped on tile. I could taste the coffee I'd had earlier, gone bitter at the back of my throat. Over Arizona, sailors had stopped their casual leaning against the rail. They were pointing now, calling down to those still on the quay. A bugle sounded from somewhere far, the notes wavering. Not the crisp morning call we expected, but jagged, like breath caught mid-run. And then, like a coin tossed into the air and caught by every ear at once, a single, unmistakable crack. Not mechanical, not accidental, a shot. The sound rolled across the water, struck the base of the mountains, and came back a little warped. We looked up in unison. The sky, moments ago a single calm cloth, had acquired movement in too many places, black dots arced in deliberate paths, engines clawing at the air, and there, thin, at first almost delicate, a trail of smoke unspooling from the belly of a plane. It wavered against the blue, wrong in a way that felt private. "Those aren't ours," someone said, not loudly, but the way you tell yourself something aloud so it stops being just a thought. Caffrey appeared at my side, his hat crooked, eyes narrowed. "You seeing this?" I nodded. "They're coming in low," he said, though that much was obvious. Too low. Another sound, not from the air this time, but from the water, a muffled thud deep enough to feel in the soles. The surface jumped, slapping against the quay. Far down the row, a man in white stumbled and clutched at a railing, the reflection of the water shattering at his feet. The orders began, still without the shape of panic, but urgent. Men were told to muster, to get below, to prepare for something unnamed. I turned toward Nevada, the gangway only yards away, the ship's grey hull calm and certain in its place. And then, slicing through the strange stillness between these noises, came the first siren. Its cry rose from the base, like an animal, announcing a kill, long, uneven, with a hitch in it that made the hairs at my neck bristle. It wasn't the practice tone we'd mocked for its bleating before. This one carried weight, the way a man's voice changes when he says your name in the dark. The pace shifted immediately. Feet struck the pier faster, cap brims angled down, eyes sharp, with purpose. I matched the stride without needing to be told. Beside me, Caffrey kept his gaze locked overhead, mouth slightly open as if waiting for a word from the sky itself. A sudden vibration shuddered through the air, the kind that rattles the teeth and makes every surface hum. Looking up, I saw the glint again, only closer now, and realized the planes were aligned not for show, but for approach. Their wings tilted, adjusting with small corrections, like a hand writing a careful signature. Somewhere aft, a klaxon took up the siren's call, and the two voices braided into a single thread of warning. The smell came next, faint, oily, almost sweet, drifting on the wind from somewhere out of sight. By the time my boots met the gangway, the air had acquired a texture, a thickness, as though it were already holding debris not yet visible. The deck of Nevada felt solid underfoot, the planks warming under the young sun. Men were spilling onto it from all points, each moving as if he knew where to go, though no one had been told the story yet. I looked back once over my shoulder at the harbour. The morning had changed while we were watching. Light harder, shadows sharper. The water no longer calm pewter but a restless surface with sudden dark spots spreading and breaking. In the distance, over Ford Island's far edge, something rose that was not cloud, not mist, darker, thicker, and climbing in a way that clouds never do. Caffrey caught my arm. "That's smoke," he said, though his tone suggested the word meant more here than it had in any other sentence we'd used it. The ship's whistle bellowed, and the deck under us thrummed with readiness. On the wind now, the faint rattle of distant gunfire, sporadic, almost hesitant, as if the harbour were still deciding whether or not to believe in its own alarm. Somewhere above, a plane curved, banking toward the battleships. Its underside caught the sun, and for a moment gleamed like something beautiful. Then it turned again, and I saw the black mouth of a bomb cradle yawning open. The day was about to speak in a voice none of us had heard before. The bomb bay yawned wider, and for a moment I hoped it would close again. Some mechanical test completed. The danger folded neatly away. It didn't. The shape tumbled free, not with the speed I expected, but with a strange kind of grace, a drop without struggle. It fell as if the air belonged to it. My eyes followed it until the glare took it from me, but the sound it carried was impossible to lose. A rising whistle that turned the space between us into something measured, inevitable. Impact. Not on Nevada, not yet, but somewhere across the harbour. A tower of water and steel and smoke surged upward, lifting itself into the blue before collapsing in on itself like a lung exhaling. The concussion slapped the air, came into my chest, and left it aching. Men on deck bent their knees without thinking, as if to weather a sudden wave. Another whistle. Another bloom. This one nearer. The shock travelling through the deck under my boots. The metallic tang in the air grew sharper, mixing now with the black bite of burning oil. The shouting began in earnest. Orders had edges now. The klaxon wailed without pause, a long thread winding tighter and tighter. I ran toward my station, the rhythm of my boots broken by the shudder of another detonation. Behind me, Caffrey peeled away, disappearing toward the forward guns. Overhead, the sky was alive with motion, planes cutting across each other's paths in hard, deliberate angles. I caught the glint of their canopies, the flash of their markings, the deep, pulsing growl of their engines as they dove. The noise was everywhere at once, filling the space between heartbeats. From Battleship Row, plumes of smoke were climbing now without hesitation. I saw one ship listing, its decks already a confusion of figures and flame. The harbour water mirrored the destruction, carrying ripples of orange where oil had spread and caught fire, burning on the surface like a second liquid sun. Men moved with a speed I'd never seen in peacetime drills. Some crouched low with rifles, others wrestled hoses across the deck. Still others vanished below with tools clutched in their fists. The air tore itself open with each passing second. The cough of anti-aircraft guns, the snap of machine fire, the heavy punctuation of bombs finding metal. Through it all, the smell grew thicker, a stew of oil, cordite, smoke, and the faint, scorched scent of wood from some unlucky pier. My throat began to rasp with it, the taste sticking to the roof of my mouth. I swallowed and it stayed. Another impact, this one so close it drove me a half step sideways. Fragments pattered against the deck, some still warm enough to bite through the thin fabric of my jumper. I ducked instinctively, eyes scanning the sky for the source. And then I saw her, Arizona. A column of black had claimed her midships, the fire reaching for the sky with greedy hands. The sound of her explosion reached us late, but all at once, a flat, deafening wall that seemed to shove the very air out of the way. For a heartbeat, I couldn't hear anything else. Only the rush of my own breath and the high, steady ring inside my head. When the world came back, it was louder than before. Voices pitched high, the clang of metal on metal, the hiss of steam escaping somewhere it shouldn't. I gripped the rail and forced my legs toward my post, weaving around a knot of men hauling ammunition. Over the water, the enemy planes banked and came again, their silhouettes cutting sharp against the morning light. The glint of bombs beneath their bellies caught my eye, each one a held breath waiting to drop. I caught sight of Caffrey across the deck. He was braced at one of the forward guns, his jaw set, hat lost to the wind. He was shouting something I couldn't hear, one hand gripping the wheel as the barrel swung to track a diving plane. His face was pale, but his movements sure. I wanted to call out, to let him know I'd seen him, but the sky chose that moment to open again with gunfire. The harbour was no longer the place I'd known an hour ago. The easy lines of moored ships were broken, tilted, half hidden by smoke. The sun, still climbing, cut through the haze in ragged beams that turned the drifting oil slicks into molten gold. It would have been beautiful if you could forget what it was made of. Another whistle, closer, and I threw myself behind the nearest piece of cover. The deck jumped under me, a sharp upward lurch, followed by the sound of something heavy shearing loose and tumbling. Shouts rose, urgent, specific, too quick to follow. I pushed back to my feet, the wood warm under my palms, and ran again. Somewhere deep inside, the part of me that had clung to routine, coffee, letters, the careful press of a uniform, was still trying to understand that this was the same day, but the air was too loud, the light too sharp, and the deck beneath me too alive with vibration to let that thought take root. We were no longer waiting for the event. We were in its shadow, and it was moving toward us fast. The first hit on Nevada came like a punch through the hull. No warning, no prelude. The deck lurched under me, the sound tearing up from below, raw and metallic, as if the ship herself had cried out. I stumbled, shoulder catching the bulkhead, breath knocked halfway loose. From somewhere aft, a geyser of water and smoke rose, carrying with it the smell of hot metal and the fine grit of pulverized paint. Men shouted, short, clipped bursts of orders, their voices hoarse against the constant scream of the klaxon. The air was no longer just sound, it was a physical thing, pressing into my ears, rattling my ribs. Each new detonation sent a tremor up through my boots, the wood beneath them alive with the ship's shuddering pulse. I dropped to my station, hands finding their places more by memory than thought. The wheel bit at my palms. The metal was already warm, the paint gritty from vibration. Somewhere above, the forward gun barked, its recoil shoving the air aside in violent bursts. The smell of cordite wrapped around me, sharp and throat-tightening. Over the rail, the harbour was unrecognizable. Arizona was burning in a way I didn't know a ship could burn. A roaring column that seemed to pull the very air into it. Flames licked at her forward mast, smoke boiling out in dense rolling folds. To her side, Oklahoma was already listing hard, men scrambling along her hull as though gravity had decided to rewrite itself in the middle of the morning. The enemy planes moved like they knew the harbour's every line and depth. They came in low, skimming the water, then climbing sharply to drop their ordnance in a perfect arc. The sun caught on their wings and canopies, each reflection flashing like a blade before they banked away. Machine gun fire stitched the air, the tracers briefly visible before they bit into metal or flesh. "Get her moving," came the order down the line, and Nevada's engines answered with a deep, rising thrum. Beneath my feet I could feel the vibration change, no longer idle, but purposeful, the ship gathering herself for motion. Men ran the length of the deck, securing lines, shouting bearings, their voices whipped thin by the wind from passing aircraft. The first strafing run hit the bow. Bullets chewed through the deck with a sound like cloth ripping under tension, splinters leaping into the air alongside sparks from metal. I ducked low, instinct more than thought, the sting of hot fragments brushing my cheek. A gunner nearby cursed and swung his weapon skyward, tracking the retreating plane. Over the water, the fire from Arizona had begun to drift, carried by the wind toward other ships. Oil burned on the harbour's surface, long fingers of flame crawling across the water as if it too were alive. Men in the water splashed desperately away from it, some clutching life rings, others nothing at all. Their white uniforms made them visible against the dark slicks, but each stroke seemed slower, the water pulling at them with invisible hands. Another bomb fell, this one hitting close enough that I saw the brief impossible stillness of it in the air before impact. The explosion drove a wall of water over Nevada's deck, drenching us in salt and grit. My ears rang with the force, my vision momentarily blurred by the spray. When I wiped my eyes clear, the harbour had shifted again. Another ship, West Virginia, was listing, her midsection shrouded in smoke. The air attack didn't pause. The planes came in waves, the sound of their engines so constant it was as though the sky itself was grinding against us. Every dive sent a shiver through the men, but their movements stayed tight, rehearsed shells loaded, bearings adjusted, eyes squinting against the light to find a target. Nevada began to edge forward, her bow slowly swinging toward the channel. The deck trembled with the strain, the engines pushing against the harbour's sluggish pull. We passed wreckage in the water, a lifeboat overturned, timbers from some shattered pier, a cap floating aimless. I tried not to think about the cap's owner. Halfway toward the channel, the second wave came. We saw them before we heard them this time, dots low on the horizon, growing larger with alarming speed. Their formation was tighter, more deliberate, their paths converging on us. The klaxon wailed anew, though it had never truly stopped. Someone shouted for everyone topside to get low. The bombs fell in pairs, the sky spitting them out as though it had been holding them back. The first mist erupting in the water close enough to rock the ship. The second struck aft, the force of it lifting me half an inch off my feet before dropping me hard. A blast of heat followed, tinged with the smell of burning rope and paint. "Engine room reports flooding," someone called. The words snatched almost away by the wind. The captain's orders came hard. Keep moving. If Nevada could clear the channel, she might avoid the fate of those burning behind us, but the planes above had marked us. Their dives came steeper now, the whine of their engines pitching higher as they closed in. The next bomb struck amidships. The explosion blew a section of the deck into jagged splinters. The air filled with fragments of wood, steel, and things I didn't want to name. The concussion punched the breath from me, left my ears buzzing with a steady, unnatural hum. When I could focus again, I saw men hauling the wounded toward cover, their white stained in patterns I knew would never wash out. I kept my hands moving, gripping, adjusting, the wheel beneath me hot enough to bite. My knuckles were white, my forearms trembling from more than exertion. Around me, the ship groaned, not a sound of surrender, but of effort, of something holding itself together under a strain it wasn't built for. Another pass overhead. The guns on Nevada roared in answer, tracers arcing up into the sunlight. I followed one with my eyes until it met the wing of an enemy plane. The metal seemed to pause mid-flight before spinning down, trailing smoke. A cheer went up, quick and rough, but it died as the next plane dove. This one's bomb hit forward. The shockwave drove through the deck, rattling teeths, slamming into lungs. For a moment, the bow seemed to hesitate, momentum stalling. The captain's voice came again, sharp. "Beach her if you have to." Beach her. The words cut through the din, a choice between open water and grounding in the shallows to keep from sinking entirely. The helm shifted. The bow turned toward the sandbar near Hospital Point. The engines groaned, driving us on, each shudder a reminder of what still held. As we closed in, the attacks thinned. Some planes broke off, banking away toward the carriers they'd launched from. Others strafed us one last time, their bullets tearing narrow, cruel paths through the air. Then gradually, the noise began to recede. The klaxon still wailed, but the sky's growl lessened, replaced by the crackle of flames and the distant pop of munitions cooking off in the heat. When Nevada's hull finally kissed the shallows, the shift was almost gentle. The deck tilted slightly, finding a new balance. The engines eased, their vibrations settling into a weary hum. Men moved quickly, checking lines, tending the wounded, eyes still darting upward in case the sky decided to return. I stood at the rail, breathing hard, my hands still locked in the shape of work. The harbour before me was a patchwork of ruin and flame. Smoke rose in thick, unmoving columns, smudging the sky into something unrecognizable. The water was littered with debris, the slick of oil spreading wide, rainbowed at the edges where the sunlight touched it. Somewhere in that haze, the sounds of battle still echoed. A gunshot here, a muffled blast there, but the worst of it had passed. Also, I thought, a small boat drifted by, its oars unmanned, turning slowly with the current. The sunlight caught on something draped over its side, a length of white cloth, stained and torn. I watched it until it passed beyond sight, then turned back to the deck. The men's faces were grey with soot, streaked with sweat, eyes rimmed red from the smoke, and yet they moved, fetching water, bandaging wounds, calling to each other in voices that had found steadiness again. I realized my own voice was hoarse when I finally spoke, asking a passing crewman if he'd seen Caffrey. He shook his head, not stopping, and was gone before I could ask again. We were still alive. At the harbour, the world I'd woken into that morning was gone. The smoke hung low, as if it had decided to stay and claim the harbour for itself. It dulled the edges of everything. Ships, buildings, even the mountains beyond. The colours of the morning had been drained and replaced with a palette of ash and rust. The sunlight tried to push through, but it broke into weak shafts, scattered by the haze. The first hour after the attack was not quiet, though people sometimes imagine it that way. It was filled with a different kind of noise, the groan of straining timbers, the hiss of steam escaping from ruptured pipes, the low roar of still burning fuel. Voices carried strangely through it all, muffled yet distinct, each one searching for someone or something. Names were called, sometimes twice, sometimes over and over, until they faded into silence. Nevada sat grounded at Hospital Point, her hull resting stubbornly in the sand. The ship's list was slight, but it was enough to make the deck feel unfamiliar under my boots. Every step was a reminder that she would not be moving again until the damage below was tended, if she could move again at all. I helped where I could, buckets of seawater for cooling metal, passing tools, hauling hoses to smother the smaller fires that had broken out along the deck. The larger blazes were beyond us. They belonged to the men on other ships, or to time itself. Occasionally a dull thump would sound from somewhere in the harbour, delayed explosions from munitions touched by the fire. Each one sent a shiver through those of us who could still feel our nerves. The smell was everywhere. Oil and smoke, yes, but also something more personal, something that clung to the back of the throat and resisted description. It was the scent of everything familiar, turned unfamiliar. In an instant, uniforms singed, paint blistered, wood scorched until it flaked under your fingers. Across the water, Arizona was still burning. Flames moved lazily over her superstructure now, the earlier violence spent but not extinguished. The column of smoke she sent skyward was the thickest in the harbour, and it spread wide at the top, blotting out a section of sky. Even at this distance, the heat from her could be felt when the wind shifted just right. Men in small boats moved between the wounded and the shore. Some were pulled from the water half-conscious, their bodies slick with oil that made it hard for rescuers to get a grip. Others were covered with blankets, faces hid. No one asked which group a man belonged to when he was hauled aboard, only whether he could be made comfortable. Near the port side of Nevada, I found myself standing beside a petty officer I barely knew. His face was streaked black from smoke, his hair damp from spray. We both looked out at the harbour for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, in a voice stripped of all ceremony, "It's not the same place anymore." I didn't answer. There was nothing to add. The count of the living and the dead began almost immediately. Sailors moved through the ship with lists, marking names, asking after men who had been seen at certain stations. The lists changed shape as the hours passed. Names struck off. Others added when someone realized a man was unaccounted for. I gave my own name, then Caffrey's, though I could only say I'd seen him last at the forward gun. The man with the clipboard nodded, wrote it down, and moved on. By mid-afternoon the sun was higher, but it didn't feel like afternoon. The day had no shape anymore. Shadows fell at strange angles across the smoke, and the light took on a bruised quality, as if it had been forced through dirty glass. The air was warmer than it had been, but not from the sun. The heat came from the burning fuel, the smouldering debris, the ship still quietly cooking where they sat. We were given canteens of water, and I drank mine slowly, the warm metal taste of it mixing with the smoke on my tongue. Food was scarce in those first hours. No one wanted to leave their post long enough to eat, and the thought of swallowing anything solid seemed absurd. What we needed most was air, but the air had become something to endure rather than take in. On the shore, civilians had gathered, nurses, doctors, and men in plain clothes, who had run toward the smoke instead of away from it. Some worked in the hospital nearby. Others helped move the wounded from the docks into waiting trucks. Their movements were quick, efficient, but their faces told the same story ours did. None of us could yet fit the morning into the shape of a single memory. It had too many edges. Late in the day, a breeze picked up. It pushed the smoke across the harbour in long sheets, thinning it in places so that patches of clear sky showed through. The sight of blue felt almost foreign after hours of grey. In those gaps, the sun shone too brightly on the wreckage, making every detail of the damage plain. The twisted rails, the sagging masts, the lifeboats blackened beyond use. At one point I found myself on the starboard side, looking toward the channel we had tried to reach. The water there was calmer, almost inviting, as if it had no memory of what had passed over it. For a moment I let myself imagine Nevada making it through, her bow cutting clean through the swell, the smoke trailing behind her instead of ahead. Then the vision dissolved as another smudge of black drifted across the scene. A medic passed carrying a stretcher with a man whose face I couldn't see. I stepped aside, giving them space. When they were gone, I realized my hands were clenched without reason, my nails pressing into my palms hard enough to leave marks. I opened them slowly, flexing each finger as though I'd forgotten how they worked. It was near dusk when I learnt about Caffrey. A gunner from the forward station came down to the deck, his voice low, telling me they'd pulled him from the wreckage near the bow. He hadn't made it. There was no room for the kind of grief that demanded stillness. So I nodded once, swallowed, and went back to work. Later, when I was alone, I found myself thinking of his 2.5 chords on the ukulele, the way the third always trailed off into a note that never resolved. As the light faded, the harbour took on a strange calm. The fires still burned in places, but their light was steady now, not the frantic flare of earlier. The smoke became a soft wall, dark at its base, glowing faintly where the flames lit it from below. Voices grew quieter, movements slower, as the exhaustion settled into our bones. From Nevada's deck, I watched the shoreline. People moved there like shadows, carrying supplies, tending the wounded, speaking in hushed tones. Beyond them, the mountains were almost black against the deepening sky, their ridges holding the last light of the day. The air had cooled slightly, though the smell of the harbour remained thick. Somewhere nearby, a bell rang, not the sharp call of alarm, but a slow, deliberate toll. It marked something, though I couldn't say what. The hour? The dead? The end of a day that had ended hours ago in all but name. The sound was heavy, each note settling into the water like a stone. As night came, the stars began to show between the drifting smoke. They were pale, cautious, as if unsure they should witness what remained. I leaned on the rail and let my eyes trace them, connecting points I didn't know the names of. Somewhere beyond them lay home, letters in drawers, kitchens where the smell of bread could still fill a room without being overpowered by burning oil. I thought of writing to my sister, telling her I was alive. I wondered how to put this morning into words that wouldn't follow her into her sleep. I imagined starting with something ordinary, the taste of the coffee, the sound of Caffrey's ukulele, before letting the rest creep in like a shadow across the page. But even in my mind, the words refused to line up. The harbour was still, not safe, not healed, but still. The tide moved quietly against the hull, a soft, regular lap that belonged to no war, no attack. It reminded me that the water had been here before us, would remain after us, and would carry our shapes in it only for as long as memory allowed. One last flare rose somewhere across the island, bright against the dark, before sinking out of sight. I watched until the glow faded entirely, leaving only the steady burn of the fires and the cool shine of the stars. It would be a long night, but for the first time since the morning began, the night felt like something we might reach the end of. You were with Lost Sapien tonight. If the past spoke to you, subscribe so its whispers reach you again.